May 7th, 1929, Chicago. Inside the Hawthorne Hotel's private banquet room, three men sat frozen at a dinner table while Al Capone stood behind them holding a baseball bat. John Scalise, Albert Anselmi, and Joseph Hop-Toed Giunta wore their finest suits, plates still full of veal and pasta, wine glasses half empty. 200 guests watched in absolute silence. Blood already marked Capone's knuckles from the first swing. The Louisville Slugger, ash wood, perfectly weighted, leaned against an empty chair at the head of the table like it had been waiting all night. 3 hours earlier, these men thought they were being honored. They'd killed over 20 people for Capone, earned his trust through years of loyalty, survived wars that buried entire crews. But 48 hours before this dinner, one phone call exposed everything. The baseball bat wasn't just a weapon. It was a message written in bone and blood. What you're about to hear changed Chicago forever. By 1927, Al Capone controlled Chicago like a second city government. His organization pulled in $60 million a year from bootlegging, gambling, and brothels across the South Side. John Scalise and Albert Anselmi were his most feared enforcers, Sicily-trained killers who'd executed over 20 men for the organization without hesitation. Joseph Giunta ran the Chicago Heights territory and dreamed bigger every month. These weren't hired hands. They were blood. Capone kept a ledger in his Lexington Hotel office. Names written in neat columns, territories marked in red ink. 3 names appeared more often than any others: Scalise, Anselmi, Giunta. They rotated as his personal bodyguards, slept in rooms adjacent to his, ate meals at his table. Prohibition had made Capone untouchable, but trust, as he'd say later, was the only currency that couldn't be counterfeited. Giunta started asking for more responsibility that winter. Subtle at first, requests to attend higher-level meetings, suggestions about expansion, questions about succession. Capone noticed but said nothing. He'd learned to watch men the way some people watch weather. Early 1929 brought Joe Aiello to the front of Capone's problems. The Northside rival had put a $50,000 bounty on Capone's head, enough money to buy 3 houses or 1 betrayal. Aiello had tried everything: machine gun ambush outside a restaurant, poisoned food delivered to the Lexington Hotel, bombs planted in Capone's car. Each attempt failed. Then the St. Valentine's Day massacre happened on February 14th, 1929, and the gang war exploded into something that made national headlines. Federal attention landed on Chicago like a spotlight. Intelligence reports started landing on Frank Nitti's desk. Someone inside Capone's inner circle was feeding Aiello information about schedules, routes, safe houses. Then a white envelope arrived at the Lexington Hotel, no return address, left at the front desk. Inside, a photograph, grainy, taken from across the street, but unmistakable. John Scalise standing outside a warehouse on 4th Street, shaking hands with a known Aiello associate. Capone studied the photograph for 3 minutes without speaking. Then he folded it once and handed it to Nitti. "Watch them," he said. "All 3. April 1929. Frank Nitti became a shadow. He followed the 3 bodyguards on Tuesdays when they claimed to be checking territory. Pattern emerged fast. Every Tuesday at 4 p.m., they met at a warehouse on 4th Street. Nitti positioned himself across the street with binoculars and a notepad. Giunta did most of the talking, hands moving in big gestures, painting pictures of the future. Anselmi and Scalise listened like students. Nitti couldn't hear words, but body language told stories. Giunta was positioning himself as the next boss, selling the vision to men who'd been killing for Capone since 1925. They discussed timing and transition. Nitti caught those words through a wire recording device he'd planted near the loading dock. Meanwhile, Capone attended public peace negotiations, smiling for reporters, shaking hands with rival gang leaders, playing the role of reasonable businessman. In private, he was planning an execution. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here's the thing about power: the higher you climb, the thinner the air gets. And the 3 men he trusted most were armed every single day, standing close enough to kill him before anyone could react. Late April delivered confirmation. A second envelope arrived, bank records showing $25,000 deposited into John Scalise's account over 3 weeks. The money traced back to an Aiello intermediary who ran a speakeasy on the north side. The deal structure became clear. Scalise, Anselmi, and Giunta would kill Capone during a public appearance, probably a restaurant or city hall meeting, and Giunta would take over the organization with Aiello's blessing. Clean transition, minimal bloodshed, maximum profit. The sequential serial numbers on those $100 bills sat in a neat stack on Capone's desk, like evidence in a courtroom. He studied them under lamplight, running his thumb across the paper. Public execution was required. A quiet disappearance would spark rumors, create doubt, let the betrayal metastasize through the organization. No, this needed to be seen, remembered, feared. That's when Capone chose the baseball bat. Not a gun, not a knife. Something personal, intimate, controlled. The bodyguards, meanwhile, operated under a false certainty. They believed Capone suspected a North Side mole, but hadn't identified them yet. They thought they still had time. They were planning to move on May 10th. Capone moved first. May 2nd, 1929, Al Capone announced an appreciation dinner for his most loyal men. Over 200 members of the organization received invitations to the Hawthorne Hotel's private banquet hall. Gold embossed cards, formal dress required, Italian feast promised. 3 names appeared at the top of the guest list with special notation. John Scalise, Albert Anselmi, Joseph Giunta would sit at the head table, places of honor, recognition for years of service. The printed invitations looked like wedding announcements. When Giunta received his, he smiled for the first time in weeks. Anselmi lit a Cuban cigar and nodded slowly. Scalise held his invitation up to the light, checking for any hidden message, then relaxed. They interpreted honor as confirmation. Capone trusted them completely. Meanwhile, the Aiello family received word. Plan proceeds May 10th. The execution would happen 5 days after Capone's dinner, giving the bodyguards time to establish trust, get close, make the shot clean. Capone had personally delivered some invitations, shaking hands, embracing men who'd bled for him. If you watched close, you could see his eyes calculating behind the smile. Ordinary details hide the truth better than elaborate lies. May 3rd through May 6th, preparation time. Capone visited a Southside sporting goods store and purchased a Louisville Slugger, Ashwood, regulation weight. The clerk assumed it was for his son. Capone paid cash and carried it out under his coat. Back at the Lexington Hotel, he practiced swings in private. Not wild haymakers, controlled strikes, calculating force and angle. He needed enough power to kill, but not so much he'd lose balance between targets. 3 men, 3 clean hits. Minimal time between swings. The menu got planned next. Italian feast, multiple courses, wine flowing constantly. The meal needed to last hours, needed to relax them, needed to make them drunk and confident and slow. Seating arrangements required precision. Scalise, Anselmi, and Giunta would sit side by side, backs to the position where Capone would stand for his speech. Their chairs would be heavy, difficult to push back quickly. The seating chart showed 3 names marked with small X's in pencil. While Capone planned murder, his public schedule stayed packed. City council meetings, charity functions, newspaper interviews. The FBI was watching him constantly, assuming the dinner was a peace negotiation with rival gangs. Agents compiled reports, took photographs, followed his car through Chicago streets. They were looking in the wrong direction. The baseball bat stayed hidden in his office closet, wrapped in cloth, waiting. On May 6th, Capone attended Mass at a Southside Catholic church. He knelt, he prayed, he took communion. The priest blessed him on the way out. That night he couldn't sleep, not from guilt, from anticipation. May 7th dawned clear and cold. The bodyguards arrived at the Hawthorne Hotel early, confident and joking. Scalise wore a new suit, double-breasted, dark blue, tailored on Taylor Street. He'd spent a week's salary on it, wanted to look sharp for his moment of recognition. Anselmi brought Cuban cigars for the table, expensive ones, saved for special occasions. He lit one in the lobby, smoke curling toward the crystal chandelier. Giunta practiced his victory speech under his breath while adjusting his tie in the bathroom mirror. Not the speech he'd give tonight, the speech he'd give next week when he became boss. He'd worked on it for days, hitting the right notes of respect and vision. 3.38 revolvers got checked at the door per house rules. Capone's security team collected weapons in a locked box, issued claim tickets, promised safe return after dinner. It was standard protocol for large gatherings, prevented accidents, maintained control. The bodyguards handed over their guns without hesitation. Upstairs, Capone stood at his office window, watching the street below. Cars arrived one after another, men in dark suits and fedoras filing into the hotel like a funeral procession in reverse. Kitchen staff had been dismissed except for his most trusted inner circle. Men who'd been with him since Brooklyn, who understood that loyalty meant silence. 200 guests filled the banquet hall by 6 p.m. Laughter echoed off marble walls. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce filled the air. Waiters carried trays of antipasto, bread, wine. At the head table, 3 empty chairs waited. Capone checked his watch. The baseball bat leaned against the wall behind the speaker's podium, hidden by a curtain. The dinner lasted 4 hours. Course after course. Pasta with red sauce, veal marsala, roasted vegetables, more wine than Lake Michigan could hold. Capone gave a speech around 9 p.m., standing at the head of the table, talking about loyalty and brotherhood and the bonds that made their organization stronger than blood. His voice carried across the room, confident and warm. He praised specific men, called out acts of courage, raised his glass to the future of their family. The 3 bodyguards sat at the head table, drunk and relaxed, celebrating their survival, toasting each other. Scalise's new suit had sauce on the lapel. Anselmi was on his 3rd cigar. Giunta kept whispering to the man next to him, something about expansion plans. Around 10 p.m., Capone proposed a final toast. "To the future of our family," he said, voice steady. 200 men raised their glasses. Crystal clinked against crystal. That's when Capone set down his glass and reached behind the curtain. The Louisville Slugger felt perfect in his hands. Ash wood, worn smooth, balanced. He walked slowly toward the head table. The room went silent first. Confused silence, then understanding silence, then terrified silence. Chairs scraped against hardwood as guests realized what was happening. Some stood, not to intervene, but to see better. The 3 bodyguards were still mid-toast, glasses raised when Capone stepped behind them. Anselmi turned first, saw the bat, saw Capone's expression. He tried to say something, maybe a question, maybe a plea. The first swing cut through air with a whistle. Wait, this gets crazier. Subscribe now, because what happens next defines Chicago for a generation. The first swing caught Anselmi across the back of the skull. The crack echoed like a gunshot. He collapsed forward, face hitting his plate, veal and pasta scattering across white tablecloth. Blood spread instantly, dark and thick. Scalise tried to stand, chair scraping backward, but Capone was already moving. The second swing came from behind, baseball bat connecting with temple. Scalise went down sideways, hitting the floor hard. Giunta, younger, faster, made it 3 steps toward the door before 2 of Capone's men grabbed his arms. They dragged him back to the table, held him in place. Capone walked over slowly, bat resting on his shoulder. Giunta was screaming, begging, promising things he'd never deliver. The third swing ended the noise. Blood splattered across a white tablecloth, across empty wine glasses, across the faces of men sitting close enough to taste it. Broken plates, overturned chairs, the smell of wine mixing with copper. 200 witnesses sat frozen. Not one person moved. Not one person spoke. Capone stood between the 3 bodies, breathing hard, bat dripping red. He looked around the room, making eye contact with specific people, making sure they understood. This wasn't rage. This was policy. Betray the organization, die publicly, become a warning. The bodies stayed at the table through dessert. Waiters served cannoli and coffee while 3 corpses cooled 6 feet away. Some men ate, most stared. Nobody left. Leaving would be interpreted as weakness, as sympathy for traitors. So they sat, they watched, they learned. Capone cleaned the bat with a napkin, slow strokes, methodical. By midnight, the message was complete. The baseball bat got wrapped in cloth and carried out like a trophy. Dawn broke over Rosewood Park with 3 bodies arranged on the grass. deliberately public, impossible to miss. Chicago police arrived at 6 a.m., called by a jogger who'd nearly tripped over Scalise's corpse. Detectives walked the scene, took photographs, wrote notes they knew wouldn't matter. Gangland slaying, the official report read. No investigation launched. No witnesses came forward. The Tribune ran the story on page 3. 3 Capone men found dead. Police suspect internal dispute. The Aiello family went into hiding immediately. Their plan was exposed, their Chicago associates compromised, their $50,000 bounty worthless. They'd invested in the wrong men. By noon, FBI agents were compiling reports. The intelligence was clear. Capone had consolidated power through terror, eliminated internal threats, sent a message so loud every gangster in America heard it. Organization response was absolute loyalty. For the next 2 years, not one man questioned orders, challenged decisions, or showed anything resembling ambition. The fear wasn't just about death, it was about the manner of death, the public humiliation, the display. Getting shot was one thing. Getting beaten to death with a baseball bat at a dinner in your honor was something else entirely. The bat itself got cleaned, polished, and mounted on the wall behind Capone's desk at the Lexington Hotel. Not hidden, displayed. Every visitor who entered that office saw it. Most knew the story. Those who didn't got educated quickly. It hung there like a painting, like a diploma, like a family crest. The message was simple. This is what happens. Trust is currency, betrayal is suicide, and Al Capone remembers everything. May through June 1929, the city changed. Dinner invitations from Capone now carried weight you could feel in your hands. Men analyzed seating charts before accepting. Rival gangs pulled back, reconsidered strategies, chose diplomacy over confrontation. Capone's reputation shifted from dangerous to mythological. The story spread. He'd killed his 3 most trusted men in front of 200 witnesses with a baseball bat, and nobody touched him for it. That's power. That's legend. His organization peaked that summer. Largest territory, highest revenue, absolute control. Untouchable. The baseball bat stayed displayed in his office, visible through the open door when he met with lieutenants, partners, city officials. Some claimed it was cleaned and polished weekly. Others said blood still marked the handle, impossible to fully remove. Both versions spread because both versions worked. Psychological warfare doesn't require truth. It requires belief. But the cost was invisible at first. Capone's paranoia deepened. He changed bodyguards every 6 months, refused to eat at restaurants he hadn't personally inspected, slept in different rooms each night. The men closest to him had tried to kill him. If them, then who else? Trust evaporated. Friendship became impossible. Every smile hid potential betrayal. Every toast carried threat. He'd won absolute power by destroying the men who'd helped him build it. The isolation was its own prison. People close to Capone said he never stopped looking over his shoulder after May 7th. The bat proved he could kill anyone. It also proved anyone could die. Years later, someone asked him about loyalty. "Real wealth is what people don't see," he answered. That line would haunt everyone who came after. By 1930, the federal government shifted strategy. They couldn't get Capone on murder. Too many dead witnesses, too much fear, too much power. So they went after taxes. The IRS launched an investigation into unreported income from bootlegging, gambling, brothels. Numbers that couldn't be buried or burned. Revenue agents compiled years of financial records, traced cash flows, documented everything Capone had tried to hide. The irony was perfect. The government succeeded where assassins, rivals, and the FBI had failed. Not with guns or raids or dramatic arrests, with accountants. October 1931, Capone stood in federal court facing 11 years in prison for tax evasion. The baseball bat was admitted as evidence of criminal enterprise, photographed, cataloged, stored in a federal evidence locker. The courtroom sketch showed him standing straight, expensive suit, confident expression, but his empire was already crumbling. Without his direct presence, lieutenants fought for control, territories split, revenue dried up. The organization he'd built through violence and fear couldn't survive without him. Doctors diagnosed syphilis during intake processing. The disease had been eating his brain for years. undetected, untreated. Three ghosts named Scalise, Anselmi, and Giunta would follow him through every prison cell, every medical exam, every moment his mind started slipping. January 25, 1947. Al Capone died at his Palm Island estate in Florida, 48 years old, mind destroyed by syphilis, body wasted from stroke. The baseball bat had disappeared after his trial. Federal evidence logs showed it missing by 1932, either stolen or destroyed. Nobody knew for sure. Urban legend claimed it sold at underground auction. Cursed object, touched by death, worth more as myth than wood. Another story said FBI agents burned it, trying to end the legend. Both versions spread because legends need multiple endings. The Louisville Slugger transformed from sporting equipment to murder weapon to ghost story. Al Capone's final years were silent ones. Confusion, memory loss, paranoia that outlasted reason. He died believing enemies surrounded him. That betrayal waited in every corner.